full name is Jose Ramon Albert.
Okay.
Two Spanish names and an American name. That's why you know I'm Filipino.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for attending our session, one of the very last of the forum. My name is François Fontenot, and I work for Paris21. It is my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Paris21 and on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, with whom we are partnering for this event and beyond. We hope you still have some energy and appetite for discussions after 2 days of discussions. Today, this afternoon, we'll be discussing new data sources for policy action from dreams to reality. So we will be discussing dreams, hype, and realities. We will try to discuss things from, not from the technical production side. There have been a number of sessions for this, but we'll try to look at things from the usage and the policy, especially the policy use side. We will try to see what works and how NSOs, National Statistical Offices, can be even more relevant in getting things to work, knowing all the sophistication and the complexity of the current data ecosystems. For this, we have a fantastic panel here. It's quite a large panel, but given the size of the podium, I think we are still too small. We have Brian Sullivan here, so let me introduce our panelists from right to left. Brian Sullivan, who's the Senior Program Manager at Google Earth and Ocean Outreach. We have Jose Ramon Albert, who's a Senior Research Fellow from the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. We have Anne Bowser, who's the Director of Innovation at the Wilson Center. We have Christophe Duhamel, who's the Coordinator of the Global Strategy to Improve Agriculture and Rural Statistics in FAO. We have Ward Answer, who's a Senior Technical Specialist at the International Land Coalition. And we have Ayush Aryunzaya, who's the Chairwoman, the boss of the NSO in Mongolia. We have Nora Madaya, who's the Director at the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. So with this fantastic panel, I think we'll have different insights into this question. We have 75 minutes, 73 now, and our plan is to have a start with our Google colleague who will share his perspective on how things have changed since the last World Data Forum and how things will change ahead again. Then we will hear from each of the panelists. Each one will give one specific story on the subject and will give his own perspective on his dreams or his nightmare or how reality calls or his own perspective on his own business. Before you have the chance to ask questions to the panel, we will ask you a question. And we'll do this through Slido. So prepare your mobile. We'll run 3 questions, and we are looking forward to have your comments. Then you will give us a few questions, and we'll close from there. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Brian for his introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. So I'm here on behalf of Google, and we have a team that's called Google Earth Outreach. And the goal is how do we use all of Google's infrastructure, its brand, all of its computing power for humanitarian, public health, and environmental and conservation goals. And so I want to speak a little bit about what type of things have become possible from a technological point of view just in the last 5 years, some of the things that are just becoming available now, and then where things might be evolving. And I want to do this through a series of stories across forestry, water, and then finally fisheries. And the principles that I want to use behind this is that we generally get involved when we have something that we can produce that's globally consistent, but also locally relevant. So people can use this within their own countries, but they can also compare this across a global perspective. We believe that sharing is contagious. The first countries to share data are seen as leaders, and then the last countries to share are also viewed with suspicion. And then finally, we think that this should be an ecosystems approach. We have a panel here that represents people from private sector, from governments, citizen science, and many other areas. And we're each bound by our own things, but in collaboration and through ecosystem, we can really drive change. So this is Google Earth. Many of you are familiar with that. And here, it gives you the ability to see a place over time. So we're looking in Rondônia, Brazil, from 75 to 89 to 2002. And we can see how deforestation is changing this area. But it's a very visual piece, but we only have segments where we happen to have imagery for that area. So how do we make this accelerate much more? And so we went about building a system we call Earth Engine. And the idea is that we had to monitor the planet at the same rate that we were changing it. So there you saw 30-some years of data, but only 3 snapshots. We want to give you much higher frequency to that. So we went out and we worked with other partners. So NASA, for example, has a whole series of satellites that are out there orbiting the globe, and that data is publicly available now. European Space Agency also has their collection of them. And so we've gone all the way back to the archives and brought all that into modern Google data centers. And we've created the largest public catalog that's ever existed for Earth observation data. And we're making this freely available for non-commercial use. This has over 17 petabytes of data, well over 11 million images, pulling from 200 different public data sets. And so once we had the world's largest catalog for this, we want to bring our computing power to bear on that as well. And so here's an example of an image in Borneo. Now, no matter when you take this photo from a satellite, you will always see clouds because it's a cloudy area. But by getting a whole stack of images from that area, we're able to do a lot of pixel math. And then we can see something that you'll never see, Borneo without clouds. Or here we are in England over the Isle of Mull, always cloudy, we can remove those clouds. So it's Google, so we did it for the entire world. So you can zoom anywhere in the world and see it without clouds to start to understand how these things are changing. And because we could do that for 1 year, we said, let's do that for the entire archive. So for the last 35 years, you can go anywhere in the world and see how it's changing. This is an example off of Massachusetts in the United States where you can see how the shoreline changes as the sand moves. This is looking in Las Vegas. And we see on the right is a reservoir. And as Las Vegas is growing over time and sprawling, the water demands are going higher and higher. You can see rivers as they change over the decades. And if you're this settlement here, how is that affecting you, and how does that affect your water sources? And so with the entire world there, people started going to different regions. So we see the glacier retreats due to global warming. We see deforestation in the Amazon, and in the top right nearby in Saudi Arabia, we see irrigation coming in and making food out of the desert. And so we see both humanity's best and some of humanity's hardest parts through that. And so in order to calculate all of this, we took 32 years of data, and it took over 2 million hours of computation. But we can split this up across all of Google's data centers, and we can do these things in about a day and a half. So now how do we apply that to forestry? In forestry, we've seen what's happening, but we want to be able to quantify that. And so they've gone through at a 30-meter pixel for the entire world for the last 12 years when they first did this, and showed where we're gaining forests and where we're losing them. And because we had it at the global scale, we could also do it at the local scale. So here we are in Indonesia, and we can see where that forest loss is happening by year. And all countries have access to this if they want to incorporate that into policy areas. And in fact, this product has been used in the Philippines to help change policy around how deforestation works. And again, massive amounts of computing that we're able to do in a small amount of time, and we make this available for these causes. We've done the same thing with surface water, one of the SDGs, looking at how that's changing over the years. So here's the Ariel Sea as it's drying up. And it's one thing to visualize, it's another thing to quantify it. And so now this is a map called the Global Surface Water Explorer. We did it in combination with the Joint Research Commission of the European Union. It's a global product. You can zoom into your area of interest and start to pull out stats on how water is changing over time. This one was about 10 times larger than the forest project that we did. But again, you can take a data product. And to move beyond that, we've partnered with the United Nations Environment to take that data product and make it easily digestible for member countries. And so now all of the statistics behind that are available in simple CSVs as well as GeoTIFFs, so that people and countries that don't have the capacity to process global data have access to their own data at a more basic level. And this is transparent for all of them. And so just yesterday, we announced a sneak peek of this, where you can go online and look at all this data for your particular country, subnational country, or hydroshed areas. And finally, I want to show some examples in fishing, where we have a policy of where we're going from a science paper to a policy to real impacts in the world. And so when we think of fishing, it's often out of sight and out of mind. But this is the extent of what global fishing looks like. There's a moratorium in China, and for 3 months they close the fishing so that the fish can recuperate. At the end of 3 months, this is what's coming to you if you're a fish. So you can count all of the commercial vessels here, and I don't need to pick on China. This is what's happening around the world. And there's a case for this, for food security, and there's many other reasons we want to keep fishing, but we need to do it in a sustainable way. And so if we count these boats, I can zoom out, and you get an extent of just what the global fishing fleet looks like. And if I'm to zoom out one more time, you're just beginning to see that. But how do we zoom out and see the entire world at once? What does that look like? So using machine learning and all kinds of artificial intelligence, we're able to map that out. And so this is the first global view of where the world's largest fishing vessels are fishing. It's about 70,000 of the world's largest ones. And I can zoom in the same way I did with the other things to an individual vessel and see where its track is. And what we're doing is we're teaching the computer what experts are able to see. So if I gave you a whole page of just data positions, you wouldn't know where the interesting piece is. But getting experts to start labeling that data, we then are able to bring it to scale using machine learning. And what we found is that a lot of countries, it's not that they're lacking in data, it's that they're often overwhelmed in data. And by using things like machine learning, we're able to tease out the insights and what are the areas that they want to focus on. So we're not replacing jobs, we're giving new tools to people to look at their own data, highlighting the areas where their human expertise is key. So in this case, we're differentiating between types of fishing behavior. And so we launched this just about 2 years ago at an Our Oceans conference, and we've seen registered users in 189 countries logging in to get data about how this fishing is happening and where. We've also seen countries really step up. So this is Ibu Susi from Indonesia. She reports directly to the president. She's famous for making a statement that she would not tolerate illegal fishing in her country. And to show that, she blows up boats when she catches them. She's blown up well over 100 of them. And she came to us and she said, I like Global Fishing Watch, but you don't have good data for Indonesia. And she's right. Here's a picture of where we have fishing in the region around Indonesia. But what she's done was unheard of a few years ago. She's taking proprietary government data and making it publicly available through Global Fishing Watch because she believes that will impact more change, reduce corruption within her own government, and increase dialogue in those regions. So what used to be this is now this with all those other areas around her. And these leaders have followers. And so just this weekend, Peru will be launching their data in line with all the other ones. And we're seeing many more countries commit to similar activities. This has started a research program where all this open data is available. And one more example, we have Enrique Sala from National Geographic. And his goal is to go out and make more protected areas. And when the government often wants to do this, there's usually pushback from industry. And they say, you can't close this area because we need it for livelihoods, we need it for fish, we need it for our food security. And now that there's more data out there, he says, here's an image of everywhere the Mexican tuna fishermen fish. This is the area that we want to protect. It's less than 4% of your total catch. It's less than 4% of your total revenue. You can't tell me that's really going to put your entire livelihood in jeopardy. In fact, that will give you more fish as that overflows into the surrounding areas. And that technique has been used to create marine protected areas all across the world, and 5 major ones have been created using this data. And so we're really excited to put these tools out there, and we're really excited to see how open data influences governments, NGOs, and all the other ones to address the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. That's absolutely fascinating. A good example of data integration and outreach and how to bridge the gap between data and knowledge and policy action. So congratulations. Now, let's move to our panelists here. Jose, you've been a key player of the Philippine statistical system for many years at the frontier between data production and data use, especially in policy. You have a nice story to tell us on the use of nightlight, daylight, and how it's actually meaningful for policy making in the Philippines. Can we please have the slides?
All right, while the slides are being shown. Firstly, allow me to thank the organizers, Paris 21 and the Asian Development Bank. And now to discuss what I wanted to say, that just like any other country, in the Philippines, decision makers need data and statistics not only for formulating policies and programs, but also for social protection targeting, and for the monitoring and evaluation of interventions meant to help our needy and vulnerable segments of society. Governments and the government and the various poverty stakeholders have in fact been providing some cash assistance to the poor, whether in the form of conditional cash transfers to influence human capital investments, or also unconditional cash transfers to our indigent elderly, or to victims of natural disasters and other shocks to household welfare, such as spikes to inflation. For instance, in the Philippines, again, our government has had a very ambitious program to increase infrastructure expenditures, but they also needed revenue, so they started having a reform of taxation policy, but in the process they actually spiked inflation in the country. So one of the things that policymakers would like to know is what was the effect of this inflation on the poor. But unfortunately now, when we start looking at these current data sets that are being used on poverty, particularly traditional data sources from household surveys, which are done triennially. So we would have to wait until information is going to be made available. And there might be other administrative data sources, such as our Ministry of Social Welfare has its own national household targeting system, or even local governments have their community-based monitoring systems. Somehow it can be confusing to decision makers given all these different data sources. And our National Statistics Office, called the Philippine Statistics Authority, has its own small area estimates that combine data from surveys as well as poverty correlates from censuses. But unfortunately, this also would require some validation. For instance, as I show in this slide here, I hope some of you can see it, although it's a little bit quite big, like too small anyways, that in one of our provinces called Lanao del Sur, the poverty incidence was around 40 to 50% in the years between 2006 to 2009. But in 2012, the estimate of poverty increased to 20 to 70%, which was 20 percentage points increase. And so while we know that poverty is not static, but it might be very difficult to explain why exactly these poverty numbers change considerably. And cognizant of this changing landscape in data and the need for more granular data, the Asian Development Bank provided some assistance to Philippines, some technical assistance that aims to strengthen the capacity of our Philippine Statistics Authority in augmenting conventional data sources with innovative data sources. So what they did is to try to explore the use of satellite data, particularly and with these small area estimates. And they managed to figure out that when you mesh this, we might be able to generate much more improved poverty estimates that would be able to explore particularly nighttime luminosity data across the years, given that there might be some sense into realizing that there is some correlation, negative correlation between luminosity and poverty, which in turn enabled our statistics office to improve the accuracy and granularity of data on poverty and welfare. ADB has already been piloting actually the use of big data, especially remote sensing data, not only on poverty but also in agricultural production in Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the results of this work were actually released in a special chapter of the 2018 Key Indicators of publication of the ADB. By integrating all these relevant big data sources into our official statistics production process, NSOs can now look into the accuracy and consistency of official statistics, working on the reliability and relevance and timeliness of data that's crucial for targeting programs to those who need help the most. Big data is not just about the data itself, but we do know that there is an ecosystem, that there's a need for partnerships, for frameworks, and communication strategies for having proper technology, infrastructure, both hardware and software, as well as the people with the right set of skill sets and even leadership that will ensure that, that all this technology can somehow be used properly by, and leveraged by our data decision makers to make real-time decisions that would improve development outcomes today for a better and brighter tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose, also for pointing out to some of the drivers which made this success in the Philippines. Now we move to Anne. Anne works in citizen science. So please, Anne, explain to us what is citizen science. We stupid statisticians know what citizen-generated data is, and we didn't know there was a science. So elaborate, please, on what this is all about and how it can be a game changer for policy making.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'd like to recognize that I am one person and one panelist, but I'm actually part of a delegation of about a dozen people who are here representing the global citizen science community and are actually sitting in the front row. So thank you as well. To address your question, yes, in the context of the UN World Data Forum, we have noticed that citizen science is considered a form of citizen-generated data. But I think it's unique in two ways. First, it's collected through the lens of scientific research. So it's subject to the same checks in terms of protocol development, data validation, et cetera, that science conducted by traditional means goes through. And second, it's not just about data collection and data generation, but it's actually about co-creation of knowledge throughout the entire research process, from identifying an area of interest that deserves inquiry, to collecting information, to analyzing, and critically, to acting upon results. It's an exciting time for our community. Last December, at the 3rd UN Environment Assembly, we announced the intent to found a citizen science global partnership, a new network of networks that will promote citizen science and advance citizen science for a sustainable future. here at the UN World Data Forum, we're building connections with sister networks like the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Last night, we created a task force to formalize a new governance model for our organization. And tomorrow, we're holding our first strategic planning workshop with support from UNESCO. The global partnership, our global partnership, is a governance framework for enabling the coordination that is required to help citizen science scale. And as the slide demonstrates, a number of our partners are also working on coordinating citizen science data. And this is work that is enabled by a new data and metadata standard that's being stewarded by the Open Geospatial Consortium, among other partners. My organization, the Wilson Center, is building one new open citizen science database to help volunteers collect and share interoperable data through a new mobile application and also through direct upload. But this is part of a much larger cloud-based ecosystem with inputs from other partner databases and existing open data assets. And we'll also work with a range of partners on packaging data outputs. We will work with groups like GEO and GEOS to elevate the value of citizen science for a new in situ data source that can be used to validate Earth observations. We'll work with partners like UN Environment Situation Room to package the data in maps and other visualizations in accordance with common themes and consortia of research projects, for example, those engaged in citizen science for vector mosquito monitoring. And we'll also work with citizens themselves to help use the data in whatever way they see fit. All of this work raises a number of tensions. First, we're leveraging standardized data collection, sharing, and documentation to help create information that can be used in policy processes, especially in the SDGs. At the same time, citizen science is considered by many to be a parallel source of information for accountability. Our federated data ecosystem will need to leverage a value-centered design approach to identify the tensions, such as this one. And we'll also need to resolve things like the conflicts between openness and privacy and develop mechanisms for ensuring provenance and making sure that community values such as attribution are upheld. And I think that as we move towards this new reality, our primary challenge is to recognize the value of convergence and the move towards formalization, while also maintaining space for the diversity of practices and the grassroots ethic that makes citizen science so valuable in the first place.
Thank you, Anne. Christophe, you've been coordinating one of the biggest StatCap initiative in ag for the last decade. You are now investing in blockchains. We haven't talked and heard so much about blockchains technology and what they could actually bring for data and especially for their potential for policy impact. So can you please tell us why you're so hopeful about blockchains? And I think you have an example on Vietnam.
Okay, thank you, François. What a challenge to try to explain the possible applications of blockchain for agricultural policies under official statistical perspective in 1 minute and 1 slide. Okay, I will do my best. So blockchain, what a hype around this new technological innovation over these last 2 years. Probably most of you have heard about that, but it remains a mystery for most of us. So rapidly said, so the blockchain is a new kind of data structure which is storing and tracking data in packages, which are called blocks, and which are connected along a chain, so it explains the name blockchain, and everything is shared in a system of distributed ledgers. So what's really interesting immediately for statisticians is to understand what are the 3 intrinsic properties of blockchain. It's data integrity, data immutability, and data availability. And this is particularly well suited for situations where it's necessary, for example, to record ownership history. And we have the perfect example of land registries, where a lot of countries are already engaged in the use of blockchain on land registries. In Estonia, in Russia, I've seen recently in UK, there are also tests, for example, in Kenya. In our case, we are particularly interested with the potential on the food supply chains, which is really an increasing domain where the blockchain is implemented exponentially over the last 18 months. So what's really important is to understand what are the main interests in terms of agri-food policies under the view of the mandate of these policies. So the policies are important for meeting the food demand, for promoting environmentally and sustainable agricultural practices, for reducing the supply chain costs, for maintaining high quality sanitary standards. For example, it's interesting to notice that 1 in 10 people in the world are concerned with somehow food poisoning every year. It's also important, the policies for sustaining profitable farming operations, and of course for increasing the incomes of small-scale farmers. So the traceability of the entire food supply chain is an element which can be used for addressing this policy demand. So a good tracing solution will help, for example, to identify what are the sources of any food problem quickly. When there is a health outbreak, by identifying the origin, you are able to remove the recall affected items. There is a recent experimentation by the chain of supermarkets, Walmart in the USA, where they made a comparison of the tracing of sliced dry mangoes with a traditional way of tracing and with the blockchain. With the traditional way, they needed 6 days for going back to the farmer, and with the blockchain, they needed 2 seconds. So you see the difference and the potential of the use of these new technologies in terms of food safety. But there is a challenge, and the challenge is that if you want to be efficient, you need to have a complete traceability from the farm to the consumer, and that's a real challenge in terms of organization. So, as I mentioned it, every day you have new initiatives coming mainly from the private sector. So recently, the chain Carrefour had launched a new initiative together with IBM for tracking some specific products, such as chicken and tomatoes. And also in the public sector, 2 days ago, the UK Food Standard Agency decided to use the blockchain for tracing cattle at the level of the slaughterhouse. So now the question is, what is the position and what is the role of statistician in front of this huge increase of available data in the field of the food supply chain? Because, as I said, it's growing exponentially. Every day you have a new initiative coming mainly from the private sector. So what will be the position and what will be the role eventually of the statistician in this process? So I will not remind you the difficulty that particularly developing countries have in the production of reliable data, for example, on the livestock sector. So I will not continue on that, but we see the huge potential that the food supply chain gives in terms of new data from the farm to the consumer. At the farm level, for example, and we are working with a private firm called T-Food. They have a concrete application running in Vietnam, and they are, for example, collecting at farm level information concerning the stocks of the animals, the movements of the animals, the breed, the age, the sex of the animal, the inputs in terms of feed, in terms of water practices, in terms of veterinary services, in terms of cost of production. At the level of the slaughterhouse, they collect information on the weight, for example, the weight of the carcasses. All this information which is available through this food supply chain, but which comes from the private sector. So the question is how the statistician could benefit from the fact that there will be an increased and huge amount of new data in the future. So we started this project. So we started from a very, very simple question. There is a project which is in place in Vietnam with this company, T-Food. And we started an experimentation with in a partnership between FAO, the Global Strategy, this private company, T-Food, the Australian Commonwealth Research Centre through their data center specialized in blockchain, because of course if you want to launch a project on blockchain, you need blockchain expertise that you don't find normally in statistical services, and also in partnership with the Statistical Office of Vietnam and the Ministry of Agriculture. So the main objective is to understand what are the potentialities and the possible implication in the future for official statisticians in this kind of availability of new data. So there are still a lot of issues related to this information, which is already existing in terms of legal framework, how statisticians could have access to this data, providing that, for example, in Vietnam, data coming from the private sector cannot replace official statistics. So if they want to use this data in the future, they will be obliged to change the law, the statistical law. We are interested in the overall performance of the system. What's the quality, timeliness, frequency of data collected at different points of the chain? What's the capacity of the system to produce what's really, for example, really important on the livestock sector, what we call the coefficient, the technical coefficient. For example, the meat, the meat per carcass of animal. And of course, they have also a partnership at local level with local authorities for establishing a register. So is it possible to use this register for frame purposes for statisticians? There are questions in terms of accessibility, confidentiality, what would be the incentives for the private sector to collaborate with national statistical authorities. And there are also issues in terms of partnership, so it's a complex partnership, but in the future, statistical services will need to establish this kind of partnership, which is not so easy. So in conclusion, so we have a field of experimentation, and we expect to have some answers to our questions by the end of the year for proposing maybe new research or proposing to some countries to provide some support in the potential use of blockchain for, in particular, for livestock statistics. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christophe, for making us dream ahead. We'll see, we'll touch base in 2 years and see where you guys are. Ward, you work for the International Land Coalition, and part of your work, as I understand it, is to influence policy through data, and you use different data sources. The new ones, the official ones, the traditional ones, name it, classify it as you wish. I mean, what's your take on this debate, and what's your take on acceptability of different data sources by policy makers?
Yeah, thank you, François. As you said, I represent here the land sector, but everything I will be said can be taken in a generic way and will echo what has been said here, and especially will complement what Anne said on citizen-led data, what we call it. But before doing so, I would like to start with a little joke. As you haven't given a joke, I'll do it. It's two friends, A and B, are walking in the streets, and A starts looking for something, and B asks, oh, A, have you lost something? He says, yes, I've lost my keys. So have you lost your keys here? He says, no, I've lost them there. But the light is shining here. And that's why I'm looking here. And it introduces well my speech is that we tend, or at least it is easier for everybody of us, to always look at the same things with the same means. And that's what we have to overcome. And I think the SDGs framework and the global frameworks you're working in now, especially in land, but also the other SDGs, is a perfect opportunity to do so because, first of all, they represent a huge progress in opening up the indicators, social, environmental, etc., but also by democratizing the process of data gathering, of opening up to new technologies, we've seen it, also to new types of actors. But what we see in practice now, and I sit on several groups of custodians for the SDGs, is that because it's a global endeavor, because of the global nature of the SDGs, covering all the countries on 169 indicators, we tend to fall back on very simplified indicators again and on the normal standardized data sources, which are the NSOs. So we tend to fall back on business as usual, and that's what we have to overcome here and use this framework, these opportunities of democratization of that presents the SDGs. And how do we do that? By opening the scope of the indicators and opening the scope of the sources of indicators. So within the ILC, to answer your question, Francois, we do it through a tool called the Dashboard for Land, or Monitoring Land Governance, where we promote citizen-led data. And what do we call, or what do we mean by citizen-led data? It is at 3 levels. First of all, citizen-led regarding the definition of the indicators. Not only the 3 indicators for land retained in the SDGs, it is making everybody part in the definition of the indicators and the methodologies. Making government part together with civil society, NGOs, academics, private sector, etc., that all together tend to agree on the indicators and the methodologies to be used. Secondly, is making citizens part of the generation of the data. And there Anne has said quite a bit, and we have other examples here and in the conference. Making them part to whatever means they can contribute to the data. But it also means that we have to go beyond household data, etc., especially in the land sector. It means that we have to go to infra-household level data assessments or individual assessment. And thirdly is making citizens part of the ownership of the data. The data should not only be NSO data, it should be the data of all and should be owned by all these entities that produce them. But that brings us to a couple of challenges that we deal with today. The dashboard is ready, is being implemented, but now we sit on this edge, on the political edge. And to make this all work, to make these ecosystems work, we sit now around the table to make the dashboard and the data it's generating, first of all, legitimatized, and secondly, officialized in these debates and in these ecosystems. Legitimatized and officialized at 2 levels. First of all, technically. That means that we have to change a lot of things with our data collection. As I said, infra-household level data collection. It's a problem for many of the NSOs. It means other methodologies, looking to very different things like perceptions of people, etc. These technical aspects have to be addressed. But then also, it has to be politically legitimized and officialized. And there, it is for NSOs to accept data that have been gathered, that have the quality that people judge sufficient to enter this ecosystem. And that are the challenges we deal with at the moment to broaden up the SDGs and to make them more responsive to the complexities and the difficulties everybody lives in today in the land sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ward. We learned from the opening ceremony the call, and we heard it a couple of times, the call for looking at admin data You know, we play with mobile phone data, we play with remote sensing. We've been playing with remote sensing for 30 years. There was a repeated call to look at admin data. And when you ask governments very often and policymakers, they actually make the case for NSOs to be much more pushy to open files from the admin and other parts of the government. Ayush, you had a successful experience in Mongolia looking at admin data and bringing new and fresh knowledge to policymakers. Can you please give a story on this?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Francois. First of all, do you know, my friends, that 24th of October is the official UN Day since 1945? So, my friends, happy UN Day. We are all United Nations. We all have our differences. So each and every country has its own mistakes and also achievements. Speaking of the NSOs, all national statistical offices, statistical systems are different. Some countries have centralized systems, some have decentralized systems. What is connecting us, what is same in each and every country is the legal environment. This is very important, and we all rely to fundamental principles of statistics. National development plans for the statistics is also important. So for the NSOs, we have kind of 4 different sources of the data that we have. First is censuses, which is counting what we have. Second is the survey, which is actually, when I talk Google language to be understandable for everybody, it is like a cook tasting the soup. So to know the taste of the soup, you do not have to eat it whole, so you can just have a spoon of it. And the sample has to be reliable sample, representative sample, so you have to have the meat, the potato, everything. The next one is actually the administrative data. The administrative data is the data that government itself collects on their duties. The next one is, of course, the big data, of which I will not here speak because it is a separate big theme. What I will speak about is the administrative data. If the national statistical offices are governmental offices, it should use all the data which government has itself. So in not every country, the national statistical offices have the total access to administrative data. In highly developed countries, for example, the Nordic countries, most of the statistical data, to 60%, is out of the administrative data. So they have budgeting savings. They can make more analyzing on that. What we have done in Mongolia is we worked together with the Ministry of Health and General Authority for State Registration. So we have now, before working together with those 2 agencies, the ministry and agency, putting together the databases that we had birth and death statistics only by birth and death by sex. What we have now, we combining all of them and having it by ID number, we have now marital status of the mother, education level, employment status. We have the newborn baby weight, height, the time which it is born. So, and it is daily basis. So what we can see is, of course, the the data will not be different from the Ministry of Health and Registration Agency and Statistics, because before the registration agency has the data only when the parents go to the registration agency and say, look, I have a new baby. Or if a death occurs and then the relatives come to the registration agency and say, look, I have to register a death case. Whereas Health Ministry has, of course, the statistics, administrative statistics. So we will have unique one database, unique data, so we can use it more for have better widely statistics, right? So I will not take more minutes. I would just say that finance ministers or giving the financing is always a question of saving the budgets. So using the administrative data is very important for improving the data. Last month, I visited also one seminar, and then I've been told, actually statisticians really do naively think that companies or cooperatives give more reliable, more truthful data to statistics rather than to taxation agency. So then it was told, statisticians, don't be so naive, they just copy the data that they gave to taxation agency, to you. So use just the taxation information, right? So it is very important to cooperate, not only with private sector, but within the government itself, yeah? And the cooperation, I would say, is the word that I will take from this UN World Data Forum. And in my country, I've been told also once from a policy decision maker, you know, Aryunzaya, why do I need actually official statistics when I can Google it? Then I was thinking, why is he not understanding statistics and preferring Google? Because it might be Google sexier than statistics. That's why I would say, I can be together with Google more sexier, because we need each other. Only then we can do better things for improving all the lives of the people, right?
Better work together.
Okay, we won't do a poll on that one. Nora, you've been an advocate for increased capacity to national statistical offices. You've repeated that, you know, in the new data ecosystem, we've heard it from Mongolia, NSOs need to have more skills to integrate different sources of evidence, maybe sometimes not their own produced raw information, and bring it closer to policymakers and explain it to them. What is your experience in Uganda? What is the capacity issue, and what are your suggestions to I mean, how do you see the future? We learned yesterday from a session on whether NSOs have a future, that there is actually a future. So we should be relaxed about this. But how do you see the future?
Thank you very much. I think with the experience that has come with the Sustainable Development Goals, the future is bright for national statistical systems, because it's opening avenues for us to learn more, to be able to do things differently from what we are doing before, because the experience was that we tended to focus on our core business, on the official statistics that everyone is looking for. The policymakers are bent on seeing the routine information that we are generating from the social, from the economic and environment to be able to make the right decisions. But there we are with the SDGs. We need to come up with information that has not been generated to be able to feed into the areas where there are gaps. And with the coming of the SDGs, we realized that we cannot only depend on the official statistics. We need to delve into the other areas, the invisible sources, if you like, that have come now more under a lot of visibility, so that we can be able to complement what we are generating from the statistical offices. That comes with a lot of expectations in terms of how we map ourselves, how we are able to respond to the needs of the users. And in my presentation, I put the user at the center of everything that we are using. And if you're going to focus on the policymakers, then you're seeing the new data sources and who exactly is expecting to use that information, the traditional sources and who is using that information. So the blending of the two sources should be able to help the policymaker to make better decisions, because now there's a comprehensive source of information. But the question is how prepared we are in terms of building capacity, one on the side of those who are generating the other sources of data, the other sources of information, and also how they are able to stand alongside the capacities that we have in the National Statistical Office, because we are going to put them under a lot of pressure. We already are working towards ensuring that they are able to generate information that is reliable in the first place. We want to make sure that they can be able to accommodate the metadata that we have got at our disposal, and that is going to use them. We need to see which thematic areas they are addressing, so that we work around the key areas where we need a capacity development. But the beauty about the National Statistical Offices, most of them now have got systems in place to manage the quality. They have got systems to manage the kind of products that they have got to generate. We have systems that are also looking at the quality of services that we render. And so building capacity within and the capacity for those other sources is something that has to be clearly defined. And I believe most of the statistics officers are looking at that. If we must coexist, we must make sure that the capacities that are being desired for us to meet the user demand and changing needs is developed within. And I think we can all benefit from either side, because if you looked at the first presentation where you're looking at the Google Earth and what information is being generated and what we are doing from administrative sources, it makes sense if the two can be able to benefit from either competencies. Those who are able to generate information that will enhance the capacity of information generation with surveys and censuses, and then those who are really about to go into what we are able to do. So a common ground for me is something that the different sources of information need to agree on, and then we build alongside the standards that we have generated, that we are using for official statistics. We have to build in mechanisms of literacy and have a common culture that we all must be working towards. If we are able to do that, I think it will enable us to leverage what we are able to give to the user. But I see some challenges in doing all that, because we must understand the priorities of government, for example, and also the priorities of the other sources of information, because if we don't understand their priorities, then we cannot determine the kind of capacities that are required. We also need to see the objectives behind what they are trying to respond to. If you look at some of the other social dimensions where we respond to, the other sources, if you took an example of the civil society, for example, they agitate to make a difference in terms of how government is performing and so on, which is different from what the statistical officers are trying to do. We want to make sure that they can inform the policy processes and so on. So knowing the objective is very important as we determine what kind of capacities we need to build. But we can ride on the opportunities that are there in the statistical offices and the data ecosystem, because we have legal frameworks, for example, that are able to shape the way we manage our business. We have strategies that have been generated in a comprehensive manner, and we can also use that one to determine the gaps in terms of capacities and where we can be able to put a niche in that. And having used those kind of frameworks, we can be able to determine where we can leverage in terms of capacity and determine who is doing what, when, and how. Then we come up with a system that enhances the way information is being generated and used. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nora. Well, thank you all for sharing your own perspectives. And I think for the interest of time, I won't try to summarize all your points. I think we won't ask you to go through the questions on the Slido. For the interest of time, we'll start the discussions now. We have 10 minutes, well, 11 minutes to collect your questions. So I think the mic should be, yeah, we have one question here on the gentleman on the front. Please introduce yourself before asking your questions. We'll collect a few questions and then we'll give the panelists a chance to answer.
Hello everybody. My name is Steffen Fritz. I'm from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis based in Austria, and I'm part of this citizen science group. But beside that, I also do a lot of remote sensing work, and I just wanted to make a few comments also with respect to what has been shown in the field of remote sensing. So I think what we've seen is really impressive, and I congratulate Google for the really great platform you're providing for free. I want to, however, make also some suggestion and give a little bit of warning around that. So remote sensing is not a panacea, and also we have to be very careful also with respect to using it nighttime light data, because it's related to economic activity but doesn't always work. So you could argue if a country decides to save energy, the street lights will go off, and at that point you lose all the correlations. And the lights of the houses are anyway off, so you won't capture that because it goes over around 3 o'clock in the night. So careful with that. And then on the Google Earth Engine side, I have some proposition how you can more democratize it. Because currently what you have presented in terms of Global Forest Watch is very much in the hands of Maryland University, and it depends a lot on the cloud screening algorithms they are using. So the more cloud-free images you can provide to the countries, themselves being able to run their own deforestation algorithms, the better. And the more uptake you will get from the countries, because the countries, they don't like to be told what their deforestation is, because they have different definitions of forests. There you lose some consistency globally, but I think this parallel possibility for countries to use it is really important, because they will report to UNFCCC and they will have to make some decisions on what their forest is. And as we know, at the current way Global Forest Watch works, oil palm, for example, is categorized as forest, and a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. So a little bit of a warning to that and a suggestion on how to do it better. That was the comment. Now I have one question, maybe you can collect it. An excellent suggestion you made on the indicators. I think it's really great to be inclusive, to open up the scope on the indicator side. But I also think we are currently stuck with what we have, as far as I understand, because the indicators are at the moment defined. They are indicator 1, and that's untouchable, as I understand, for many years. So what is your suggestion on how to go about this way to open up the scope on the indicators and to be more inclusive with governments and citizens, as you have mentioned? Thank you.
Can we collect a few other questions, maybe? Yes, the lady on the right. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Marla Asis. I'm from the Philippines. My question is for Anne Bowser. I'm wondering whether there is room for qualitative data in your science, citizen science approach. Thank you.
Whether there's room for...
Can you please repeat the question, because it was really unclear from here.
Sorry. I'd like to know whether there is room and scope for qualitative data in your citizen science approach. Thank you.
Okay, then I propose Brian Award can give a go at the first question, and then Anne can...
So thank you for your comments on that. I completely agree that remote sensing is not a panacea. And I think it also shows how that ecosystem approach is necessary, because Remote sensing is only good if you have ground validation data, and I think this is where collaborations with groups like yourselves really open that up to bring the next level of remote sensing and make that possible. You had a few comments about, in order for countries to really believe in the data, it's really important that they be involved in the process. And we completely agree with you on that. The example we gave with Mount Hanson's data was really one of the first projects we did with Earth Engine. And while the data is completely open, the methodologies are something that Mount Hanson still has, and that's a more close one. I think going forward, Google would like to prioritize partnering with organizations that make as much of the methodology and the ground control points, as well as the resulting data product available. But we've been working closely with FAO and other organizations using Earth Engine. And so part of the forest resource assessment, they've now taken Mount Hanson's data, JAXA tree coverage data, and many other ones. And we've packaged this up in a way where they go to member countries and say, here's a portfolio of tools that are available to you. And these other global data products might get you 70, 80% of the way, but it's up to the country to refine it as they see fit so that they have ownership and full understanding of what they're submitting. Because to your point, one person's definition of forest is very different than another. Think tropical versus dry lands or something like that. And happy to talk to you afterwards.
Walt?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Indeed, the indicators are fixed. What we put behind the indicator is not. So the proxies and the methodologies are not. So now there's here room for other actors to intervene with the custodians of these indicators. And for indicator 1.4.2, for example, regarding land, that's what civil society has done. We forced, together with the custodians, a multi-stakeholder platform and opening up into a multi-stakeholder platform in order to develop the proxies behind the indicator and the methodologies for this for these proxies to be defined. There has been a decision for 1.4.2 land indicator, again, to use administrative data by the custodians, but civil society has proposed also to integrate citizen-led data, looking at perceptions of tenure security, for example. And that has been retained, and it has been accepted because indicator 1.4.2 has become tier 2. Now, that's on the indicators themselves. They are, again, fixed and core. That doesn't mean that governments can enter other or can integrate other indicators in their censuses or in their databases, etc. So now there's a second level of engagement ongoing between civil society, which is not at a global level, not at the SDG level, but at national level, by pressurizing government, first of all, to accept or to integrate the SDG indicator because they're voluntary, they're not compulsory. So there's already a political engagement there. But on top of that, a political engagement to push government to add other indicators, and that's where my story comes in, where we can say, well, whatever indicator, and these type of methodologies. And a whole engagement process starts there. How do we do that? We do that through multi-stakeholder platforms, where government, civil society, private sector, etc., sits together and trying to open up this debate for the indicators and additional indicators.
Anna, would you like to answer the...
Yes, is the short answer. There's definitely space for qualitative data in citizen science. I actually think that I come from a qualitative perspective, and to me, the most important thing about any piece of quantitative data is the context that it was collected in. And I'll be the third person in the session, including the audience and the panel, to say one person's definition of a forest is different than another's. And I think that's a really important statement that refers to how, through citizen science, local and contextual and more qualitative knowledge or information can be used to sort of bring meaning to numbers and more quantitative assessments that can be used by policy authorities, other authorities, and then also the people themselves.
Thank you, Anne. Do we have any questions? We still have a bit of time. have 2 minutes. If we have no more questions, I think everyone's tired and needs a coffee. Let me try to give you a few takeaways. So we heard from a distinguished panel that new data sources actually impact policy design, policy monitoring, the challenges and the opportunities for the national statistical offices have been clearly summarized by Ayush and Nora. The capacity dimension, the capacity to learn and to advise the government on what are those new data sources, how they work, how precise they are, how good they are, is certainly something which is big ahead of NSOs. The same goes for new technologies, not just new data sources, but goes hand in hand with a good understanding of what new technologies can yield. And I think the good news is that there seems to be a momentum for funding and for capacity, which is music to the ears of Paris 21, because we've been, again, advocating for a new role for NSOs and new skills. And we just learned from the previous session that there seems to be light in front of us for new skills and new funding. So with this, I think time is up. And I would ask you to join me in thanking the panel and give them a round of applause. So thank you very much. And I think this session is over. Thank you.